Okay, so continuing our discussion of different kinds of fallacies, let's turn now to a very common kind of fallacy known as the straw man. With the straw man, someone makes an argument with a conclusion like global warming exists, for example. Then a straw man is a counter-argument which attempts to respond to the argument but actually attacks a distorted or weakened version of the arguer's position. So in this example, the counter-argument states correctly, it doesn't get hotter every single day of the year, but the person who's defending global warming obviously isn't saying that that's the case. So the counter-argument is misrepresenting the position that they're attacking. Rather than attacking their real opponent, they're attacking a straw man, like a weak imitation, in order to make their job easier. This is clearly cheating, and it's a form of bad reasoning that's actually very common, so keep an eye out for it. Another really common fallacy that you will see often in everyday life is the slippery slope. The slippery slope argument basically says that if one thing happens, that will send us falling down the slippery slope and a whole bunch of other things are likely to follow. This is known as a fallacy because usually the things that are supposed to follow are not actually that likely to happen, even given the initial event. So for example, if they let people into the restaurant without a tie on, then pretty soon people will want to eat here in the nude. The arguer is trying to say that they shouldn't allow men to eat at the restaurant if they're not wearing a tie, because if that happens, then the next step is that people will want to eat in the nude. But is that really the case? That seems like a pretty big leap. So it's a fallacy because the supposed slippery slope doesn't really exist. Now, in some cases, a slippery slope type argument isn't necessarily a fallacy. For instance, if Johnny gets the flu, then the rest of the class will get the flu as well. This is still probably not a great argument, but at least there is some causal reason to believe that the flu could spread from Johnny to the rest of his classmates. So we tend to call an argument a slippery slope when it really leaps to a conclusion that isn't justified by the initial premise. Let's next look at false alternative. In this fallacy, the arguer presents their opponent with a choice between two things and suggests that only one of them is the truth. So the problem is the choices or the alternatives that are being offered are not genuine alternatives. So consider, either we stop at the next restaurant we see or I'm going to die of hunger. The obvious conclusion is that they should stop at the next restaurant since it would be bad for that person to die of hunger. But this is a false alternative because it's not the case that the person is going to die of hunger if they don't eat right away. So a false alternative, or sometimes known as a false dilemma, presents a pair of options when there are really other possibilities to consider. Okay, for our next fallacy, we have what's known as to quoque. Although the name is a bit unusual, it's actually pretty intuitive and something that you might have encountered before. Essentially, it involves trying to win an argument or avoid some conclusion by accusing the other person of hypocrisy. For instance, you're accusing me of cheating on the exam? I saw you copying the answers from Dave. Notice that this is a fallacy because even if the other person did copy the answers from Dave, that doesn't make it any more or less likely that the speaker cheated on the exam as well. Finally, we'll look at one more related fallacy in this part. It's known as ad hominem, which means roughly against the person. And an ad hominem fallacy is an argument that doesn't try to win by offering good reasons or evidence, but rather directly attacks the personal character of the other person. For example, I didn't cheat on the exam. You're a liar and you stole money from your own brother. You might recall this kind of fallacy coming up a lot with political advertisements, since these often appeal to some character flaw in their opponent. But it's usually a fallacy since a logical argument ought to deal with reasons and justifications and not just try to undermine the other person's character. So in this video we've reviewed a number of different types of fallacies, and in the future we will look at a further list of such fallacies.